Imagine waking up from a coma, only to find a termination letter taped to your hospital bed. Not a hope you recover message, just a cold you're fired. Never imagined a single morning could change my life forever, but that day did. And the strange part is, I don't even remember it happening the way others do, because by the time I woke up days later, everything had already fallen apart without me even being conscious to defend myself. So, let me take you back to the moment. Right before everything went black, I remember rushing to work that morning, wearing the same old navy blazer I always did, clutching my coffee with one hand and typing last-minute emails on my phone with the other, like every other exhausted employee running on caffeine and stress. And I remember replaying my boss's words in my head again, the warning he gave me a week earlier. "Olivia, your attendance has been poor lately. You need to fix it, or there will be consequences." And it stung because I knew I had been late, but it was because I'd been feeling dizzy and lightheaded for weeks yet. Every time I tried to tell him, he shut me down, saying excuses don't keep the company running. So I learned to keep quiet and pretend I was fine, because that's what the workplace expected of me. And that morning, I was determined to prove myself. So I skipped breakfast, rushed out the door, and kept telling myself, just push through one more day. But life clearly had other plans, because minutes after stepping into the office, everything started spinning. Sounds felt far away. My heartbeat got too loud, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. I tried to steady myself, pretending everything was normal. I didn't want anyone thinking I couldn't handle my job, but my vision went blurry, and I remember collapsing forward while people screamed somewhere in the distance. I remember hitting the ground. I remember someone shaking me, asking if I could hear them, but I couldn't answer. And then nothing. Just darkness, total silence, like the world had been paused or like I didn't exist anymore. When the world finally came back, I woke up to a beeping sound. First then, bright hospital lights stinging my eyes. Then the weight of wires attached to my body. And I didn't know where I was. I tried to move my arms, but they felt heavy, like they weren't mine. And right there at the edge of the bed was a paper taped to the metal bar, folded once with my name written across it. And for a second, I thought it was a get well card, maybe something nice from a coworker, maybe even from my boss. But when I pulled it closer with shaking fingers, the letters blurred because my eyes filled with tears. It was a termination letter, effective immediately, failure to meet attendance standards. Position revoked, no benefits, no severance, no call, no sympathy, no explanation for what happened, not even the courtesy of waiting until I woke up. I stared at that paper thinking this had to be a mistake, something that could be fixed when I returned to the office. But I didn't know then that the firing wasn't an accident. It was intentional and much colder than I ever imagined. Do you think her boss secretly disliked her from the beginning? I tried to speak, tried to call for a nurse, but my throat felt like sandpaper and every breath burned like fire. So I pressed the call button beside my bed, waiting for someone, anyone to help me make sense of what happened. And eventually a nurse rushed in, smiling gently, like she had been waiting for me to wake up. She told me her name was Maya. She explained that I had been unconscious for 4 days, 4 entire days of my life just gone. And while she talked, my eyes kept drifting to that letter on the blanket like it was mocking me, reminding me that even though I survived something dangerous, I still somehow lost everything in the process. I finally managed to croak out the question that terrified me the most: why was I here? And Maya's expression changed instantly. She told me that when I collapsed at work, my heart had stopped for several seconds and the paramedics arrived just in time. She said I was lucky to be alive, but no part of me felt lucky, especially when the next group of people entered the room, my parents. They rushed toward me crying, my mom hugging me so tight I could barely breathe, and my dad gripping my hand, like if he let go I would slip away again. And they explained the rest of the nightmare, something I never knew. I had a medical condition that had stayed silent all my life, a heart rhythm issue, the kind that could strike randomly without warning, the kind that put me in a coma. I listened, trying not to cry, feeling completely exposed and powerless, and then like an unwelcome memory. The termination letter flashed into my mind again. I shoved it toward them, asking if they knew anything, and my mom read it. Her jaw dropped. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and she looked furious, like she might march straight to my office and fight everyone there. My dad told me not to worry and focus on recovering first, but of course, worry was all I could do, because while I laid trapped in a hospital bed, unable to even sit up straight, my former boss was probably already replacing me, pretending I never existed. Later, when I was finally stable enough, my phone was returned to me and the screen almost exploded with notifications, texts, emails, voicemail alerts. But one message stood out, a short one from my coworker Jenny, the only person there who actually treated me like a human being. It said, "I'm so sorry, Liv. I tried to stop him, but he already submitted all the paperwork," he's saying. "You abandoned your job? I'll explain everything. Call me when you're awake." Abandoned my job? Those words hit me harder than collapsing. My hands shook as I tried to type back, asking her what she meant, but before I could hit send, the nurse gently took the phone away, telling me that stress could make my condition worse and I needed rest. But how was I supposed to rest, knowing I'd been fired? Not for being sick, but for being unconscious, because apparently in his eyes, nearly dying was the same as being irresponsible. I didn't know it yet, but that cruel decision would be his biggest mistake. Would you confront the boss immediately or wait until fully recovered? I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second, because every time I closed my eyes, I imagined my boss sitting at his desk, rolling his eyes and telling HR that Olivia just stopped showing up, like I was lazy instead of unconscious, and fighting for my life. The anger built inside me like a storm, and by morning, I was determined to get answers, no matter what the nurse said about staying calm. When visiting hours started, my best friend Serena arrived, bursting into the room like a hurricane of worry. She hugged me so tight I nearly cried again, and she kept saying she couldn't believe any of this was real, that she had been texting me every day and never got a reply. I told her I had been unplugged from everything, asleep through all of it, and when she noticed the letter, her whole face changed. She read it slowly, and her expression turned from sadness to disbelief and then straight into rage. "That man fired you while you were in a coma?" She almost shouted loud enough for the hallway to hear. "He can't do that, Olivia. He literally can't. And even though she was right, even though it was illegal and heartless, none of it brought my job back or fixed the damage my future plans felt like. Glass shattered on the floor. She sat beside me and told me what I missed while I was unconscious. Apparently, the company had been having budget issues, lots of rumors about layoffs and bad management, and my boss, Mr. Harrington, had told people I had quit without notice, not once mentioning that he watched me collapse right in front of him, that he saw the ambulance take me away, and never once checked on me or told anyone the truth. I felt sick thinking about it. He saw me on the floor, barely breathing, and instead of helping me hold on to my job, he used it as an excuse to get rid of me. Maybe because I wasn't his favorite. Maybe because I didn't laugh at his creepy jokes. Maybe because I didn't make him feel powerful. I didn't know. I just knew it wasn't fair. That night, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just scared anymore. I was done being the girl. Things happened to. I wanted to do something. I wanted to make him regret treating me like I was disposable, but every time I thought about confronting him, I also remembered I could barely stand. I was still hooked to machines, my heart still fragile, but anger has a way of becoming fuel, and I used it to push myself through recovery day by day. 3 days later, Jenny finally visited in person, her eyes full of guilt. She held my hand and whispered that she had overheard the whole thing, that Mr. Harrington had rushed HR to file everything before anyone could stop him. She said the reason she texted me was because she didn't know if she'd ever see me again, and that she felt responsible for not doing more. I told her none of this was her fault, but she shook her head, tears streaming down her face, and then she told me something that changed everything. She said someone else knew the truth, someone very important, and they were already planning something big on my behalf. I didn't understand who or what she meant, but it didn't take long for me to find out. What do you think is coming next? Revenge? Legal action? Or a plot twist from someone unexpected? The next morning, a woman I had never met before walked into my hospital room, wearing a sharp navy suit and carrying a laptop bag. She didn't look like a nurse or a doctor. She looked like someone who meant business, and before I could ask who she was, she introduced herself with a calm, confident voice. I'm Melissa Grant. I'm an employment attorney hired on your behalf. I stared at her speechless because I had no money to hire anyone, and my family definitely hadn't done it. Melissa smiled at my confusion and told me that she'd been contacted by someone from my workplace, someone who personally witnessed everything and wanted to make sure I got justice. I immediately thought of Jenny, but Melissa shook her head. She said the informant wanted to stay anonymous for now and that this person had already sent her internal emails, HR documents, and time-stamped security footage from the day I collapsed to security footage. I felt a chill thinking about it. Melissa opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me, showing the office hallway cameras. The footage slowed down, and there I was walking toward my boss's office, my hand pressed to my chest, breathing hard, and then right in front of his door, I collapsed, hitting the floor, and the camera caught everything, the panic, the way my body went still. And then it showed Harrington walking out of his office, looking down at me, frowning instead of helping. He actually stepped over me like I was an object blocking his way, and then he walked off screen without even calling for help. Seconds later, 2 coworkers found me and called 911. Watching it made me feel like I was reliving it, even though I didn't remember any of it. Firsthand, my father had to leave the room. He couldn't even look at the video. My mother was shaking with rage. Serena was whispering curses under her breath. Melissa nodded like she had seen this kind of cruelty before, and she said something I will never forget. You didn't get fired because you missed work. Olivia, you got fired because he didn't want anyone to know what he did. She explained that if the footage went public, if the company learned the truth, Harrington's career would be over, and he knew it. So he tried to erase me before the truth erased him. She also said that the termination letter had been backdated, a strategic move to make it look like I didn't show up long before the incident, as if they were forced to dismiss me for attendance issues. The level of manipulation made my skin crawl, but the next part shocked me even more. Melissa had already reached out to HR, and they pretended they didn't know anything. She told them she had footage and witness statements, and suddenly they stopped responding. She said the silence confirmed guilt, and she wasn't backing down. She had already drafted a legal complaint not only for wrongful termination, but also negligence, emotional distress, and the most serious one, liability for endangerment, because Harrington ignored an employee in medical distress. I was overwhelmed, but not afraid anymore, because for the first time since I woke up, I didn't feel powerless. But then, something even bigger happened. The person helping us from inside the company requested a meeting with me and Melissa. In secret, they wanted to talk face to face. They said things were about to explode, and I needed to know the real reason Harrington wanted me gone. Something deeper was hiding under all of this, and I was about to learn what it was. Do you think the anonymous insider is a friend? Someone I don't expect? Or someone with their own agenda? The anonymous insider wanted to meet that same evening at a quiet cafe near the hospital. Melissa insisted on attending with me, and my parents agreed, only after making sure I was well enough to leave the hospital. For a short time, we took a wheelchair just in case, and Serena came too because she refused to leave my side. The whole car ride, my mind spun with questions: who cared enough to risk their job? Why stay anonymous? Why now? And what did they mean by the real reason Harrington wanted me gone? When we arrived at the cafe, it felt strangely dramatic, like something out of a movie. The place was mostly empty, quiet, soft music playing, and I kept staring at the door, waiting for someone to walk in and reveal everything. Then, the bell above the door rang, and in walked someone I never would have expected in a million years. Not Jenny, not a friend, not even an enemy. It was Mr. Thompson, the company's longtime HR director, the man famous for never breaking rules, never bending policies, never getting involved in personal drama, yet there he was standing in front of me carrying a folder like it weighed more than the world. He sat down looking exhausted, almost ashamed, and told me this wasn't about budget problems at all. It wasn't about attendance issues either. He leaned forward and said, Olivia, you need to know your boss was never planning to fire you because of your collapse. He was planning it long before he just needed an excuse. I didn't understand, and Melissa asked for clarification, her tone sharp and direct. Thompson opened the folder, revealing printed emails from Harrington to HR discussing performance concerns that didn't exist and conversations about removing an employee quietly before she becomes a problem. All dated before the day I collapsed, he had been preparing my termination, even when everything at work was normal. I asked why, what did he have against me? I just did my job. I stayed out of trouble. I didn't step on anyone's toes. And then Thompson took a deep breath and said a sentence that changed everything. Because you rejected him. The room froze. Even the cafe music seemed to disappear. He explained that months ago at a company dinner, Harrington had made advances toward me. Nothing obvious enough to file a complaint, but enough that when I politely brushed it off, he felt humiliated. Apparently, men like him don't handle rejection, not even silent rejection. And ever since that night, he had been slowly pushing me out, decreasing my responsibilities, excluding me from projects, and documenting fabricated issues to justify firing me once he felt it was safe. My stomach twisted because I remembered that night and how uncomfortable I felt, but I had tried to forget it, brush it off, pretend it didn't matter. And now here it was turned into revenge because I didn't flirt back, didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Thompson continued saying he didn't know about the collapse until later, and when he found out Harrington had already filed everything and threatened HR to stay out of it or be replaced too, he said he came forward because watching that footage changed everything for him. He couldn't let Harrington get away with it anymore, and he intended to quit soon regardless, but wanted to help me before leaving the company. Melissa thanked him calmly, but I could feel her anger rising. She said this wasn't just wrongful termination anymore. This was retaliation, abuse of power, and harassment, and we were going after the entire company, not just Harrington. I didn't say a word. The whole ride back, I just stared at my hospital bracelet, thinking about how a man's bruised ego cost me my job, nearly my future, and almost my life. But if he thought he had erased me, he was about to learn what real consequences looked like. Would you expose the boss publicly, take him to court quietly, or do both at the same time? The moment we returned to the hospital, Melissa got on her laptop and began working like a storm. She typed so fast it sounded like rain hitting metal. She said we were done waiting for the company to do the right thing because they already proved they wouldn't. She drafted an official legal notice and told me that once it was sent, there was no turning back. Everything would become war, public, messy, and loud. I was scared, but there was something stronger than fear building inside me. Anger mixed with dignity, mixed with the need to make sure no one else got treated the way I was treated. So when she asked if I wanted to move forward, I said yes, without hesitating, and she nodded, like she expected me to choose that path. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital, and I went back home. Nothing felt the same. Even walking into my apartment felt different, like I wasn't the same woman who left for work the morning I collapsed. I was weaker physically, but I was stronger, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Serena decided to stay with me for a few days, to make sure I don't do anything stupid, but also to make sure I do something epic, as she called it. That night, the legal notice was served to the company, and the next morning, the entire office exploded. My phone kept vibrating, nonstop messages from coworkers asking if it was true, if I really had footage, if HR really knew everything, if Harrington really stepped over my body like trash. The company tried to contain the chaos, but things like this never stay quiet. People talk, screenshotted emails spread. Then, a few employees threatened to walk out if they didn't address the situation. By noon, Harrington called me no apology, no emotion. He sounded irritated more than anything. He said I was misinterpreting events and borderline defamatory, and I should fix this before it ruins everything. I could hear the panic under his forced calm voice, and it made me feel something close to satisfaction. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I simply said, "You should have thought about that before you fired a woman in a coma," and then I hung up. Later that evening, Melissa called to say the company had offered a settlement, a big one, but it came with a non-disclosure agreement, which meant silence, no lawsuit, no justice, no exposure, just money to make me disappear again this time. Legally, my parents thought I should take it because it would secure my future, but Serena shook her head and said, "They want to pay you to protect him, not to help you." And deep down, I knew she was right. The settlement wasn't kindness, it was fear. Before I could decide, something unexpected happened. A journalist emailed me. She said she received an anonymous tip about a woman being fired while in a coma, and she wanted an interview. She had documents too, and she hinted that she already knew about the harassment and retaliation. I sat staring at that message for a long time because if I talked, the story would stop being a case and become a headline. I could take the money and stay silent, or I could speak and destroy Harrington's entire career and reputation, not quietly, but publicly loudly enough for every company to think twice before abusing someone again. That moment, I already knew which choice my heart was leaning toward. If you were in my place, would you take the money and move on, or expose the truth, even if it gets messy? I barely slept that night. The journalist's email sat open on my phone, glowing in the dark like a crossroads. I kept imagining two futures, one where I was financially secure, quiet, forgotten, and another where the truth exploded everywhere, terrifying, unpredictable, powerful. I thought about the months Harrington spent tearing me down, belittling me, humiliating me, destroying my confidence one meeting at a time, and how I stayed silent because I needed the job, because I thought maybe it was my fault. By morning, I was still debating when Serena walked into my room, holding 2 cups of coffee, and she didn't even say good morning. She just looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You already know which choice feels right, so stop trying to convince yourself otherwise." And the strange thing was she was right. I wasn't afraid of speaking anymore. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I emailed the journalist back and agreed to talk, but I set one condition. I said I wouldn't speak unless she promised to protect the nurses who helped me because Harrington would go after them too. If he could, she agreed, and scheduled an in-person interview for 3 days later. Suddenly, everything became real. Melissa wasn't thrilled at first, not because she disagreed with exposing the company, but because journalists move faster than lawyers. She needed to prepare everything, Documents, evidence, statements, witnesses. She wanted to control the narrative, not watch it explode, but when she saw that my decision wasn't changing, she fully switched into war mode. She said, if the press is getting involved, we're doing this intelligently. The next 3 days were intense. We built a timeline of every meeting, every email, every demand, every insult, every ignored HR report, and of course the day I collapsed at work. It was painful reading everything out loud, reminded me of how long I kept going while breaking inside. Serena held my hand through parts of it, I cried through others, and the more I remembered, the more anger turned into purpose. The day of the interview, I was nervous to the point of shaking. I wore simple clothes and no makeup because I didn't want the world to see a polished version of me. I wanted them to see a real woman who was hurt but not defeated. The journalist had eyes that didn't judge, she didn't rush, she didn't push, she listened, she let silence exist. She recorded every word, and when she asked me, what do you want from all this? I said the first thing my heart spoke before my mind could edit it. I want them to stop thinking they can destroy people and walk away like nothing happened. When the interview ended, I felt lighter. Not happy, not relieved, but strong. Like a weight shifted from crushing my shoulders to fueling my backbone. The journalist thanked me and promised to send the article before publishing. She walked out the door, and suddenly the apartment felt different, like it wasn't a battlefield anymore, but a waiting room for justice. However, before the truth reached the world, something else happened, something no one expected. A message appeared on my phone from an unknown number, 3 words, you're making a mistake. Then a follow-up 1 minute later, you don't know everything. And attached was a photo of something that made my stomach twist because it suggested that there was more to the story than I realized, something dark, something hidden. What would you do in my place? Ignore the warning or find out the truth before going public? I don't think I'll ever forget the look on Mr. Grayson's face when he saw me step out of that elevator alive, because for a moment he actually froze like he'd seen a ghost. And honestly, that alone made every painful step of recovery worth it. But I didn't walk in there to scare him. I walked in because I deserved justice, and I wasn't leaving without it. So I held my folder tight and walked into the conference room where the board was already waiting, and Rachel motioned for me to sit beside her, which gave me a tiny boost of confidence, even though my hands were shaking under the table. And when the HR director asked me to start, I told them everything from the accident to the surgeries, to waking up as a girl who had lost her job before she even woke up, and there was silence so deep that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I slid the printed emails across the table. First, the rejection letter dated 2 days after my accident, then the internal emails where Mr. Grayson wrote that removing Avery will help clean up weak performance, and then the insurance denial because he claimed I had voluntarily abandoned employment. And every face around the table slowly shifted from neutral to horrified, and someone gasped when they read the timestamp showing he processed my termination while I was literally on life support. And Mr. Grayson immediately tried to defend himself, saying he didn't know that I was in the hospital and that it was standard procedure for someone who didn't show up for work. But Rachel cut him off and said, if that were true, why did he block her from visiting me? And why did he tell the team not to mention me ever again? And suddenly his excuses began to collapse like badly stacked cards. The HR director asked me if I wanted reinstatement, and I said no. I didn't want to work for people who saw employees as disposable, but I did want accountability because I wasn't the only one who had been bullied or ignored or pushed, despite health problems, and it had to stop. So I told him I wanted my benefits back, unemployment settlement, compensation for wrongful termination, and a formal written apology. And Mr. Grayson laughed nervously like I was being dramatic, but the board didn't laugh. They stared at him with an anger I'd never seen. The chairman, who hadn't said a single word until now, calmly asked him to step out of the room. When he finally left that room, everything inside me collapsed. I started shaking and crying, and Rachel wrapped her arms around me and whispered, you're safe now, it's almost over. And for the first time, I believed it. Then the board returned and told me they had unanimously agreed to everything I asked for with an additional settlement for emotional distress and medical expenses. And they thanked me for having the courage to expose something they should have seen sooner. And I walked out of that building with Rachel beside me, my head spinning, my heart racing, but my soul finally steady, because for the first time since the accident, I wasn't broken anymore. I was in control again. And nothing felt more powerful than that. Do you think Avery will ever forgive what her old boss did to her? Or should she cut emotional ties forever? You'd think that winning the settlement would instantly fix everything, but it didn't, at least not right away. Because even though the money solved the medical bills and gave me security, the emotional damage felt like a bruise that kept showing up in different colors every single day. And after the meeting, I went back to my apartment, sat on the couch, and stared at the wall because I didn't even know who I was anymore. I had spent so many years building my job around my identity that without it, I felt like a blank page, and that scared me. But Rachel came over later that night with takeout and blankets, and she told me that maybe losing the job wasn't the end. Maybe it was the starting point for something better. And I wanted to believe her. I really did. Every few days, I received updates from the board, and one afternoon, I got an official letter informing me that Mr. Grayson had been terminated effective immediately due to unethical conduct and multiple violations, and I should have felt pure satisfaction, but truthfully, I just felt numb, because revenge wasn't what I really wanted. I wanted to matter. I wanted to be treated like a human being, not a number lost in an HR spreadsheet. And the more days passed, the more I realized something that surprised me. I didn't hate him as much anymore, because hating him gave him space in my mind, and I wanted that space back. I wanted my peace back, and slowly I started to feel stronger, not bitter, not angry, just stronger. And I didn't expect that. Then one morning, Rachel called me out of nowhere screaming with excitement and told me to turn on the local news, and when I did, My breath caught in my throat because the headline was about a new employee protection initiative. Inspired by my case, the company had announced a partnership with a nonprofit to ensure medical leave protections and job security for workers dealing with life-threatening emergencies, and they called it the Avery Initiative. And I just froze because my story that almost destroyed me had just turned into something that might protect so many others, and I broke down crying, but it wasn't the same painful crying this time. It was the kind that felt like healing. Days later, the HR director reached out saying they wanted to present an award to me for courage and advocacy. And at first I wanted to hide because I wasn't used to good attention, but Rachel convinced me to go. And when I walked on stage, the entire audience stood up, clapping, cheering, smiling at me. And for a moment, it didn't feel like a story about pain anymore. It felt like a story about survival and growth. And every single time I saw someone's eyes reflect empathy, I knew deep inside that I didn't survive for nothing. I survived because my survival would help someone else someday. And that thought made me feel whole, in a way I hadn't felt in a very long time. If you were Avery, would you accept an award from the company that once mistreated you, or refuse on principle? After the ceremony, life didn't magically become perfect, but it finally began to make sense again. And that was something I hadn't felt in so long. I think the turning point was when I realized that what happened to me didn't define me anymore, because for so many months, the coma, the surgery, the firing, the lawsuit, the meetings, all of it formed this heavy story that sat on my chest every day, and now I was finally starting to breathe without it weighing me down, and people online began sharing the story to strangers, thanking me for fighting when they never could, and reading those messages made me cry in the best way, because my pain had turned into someone else's strength, and that felt like purpose. Weeks later, I got an email from a hospital asking if I would speak at a recovery event for patients dealing with trauma, and I almost didn't accept because I still didn't always feel brave. Sometimes I still woke up scared that everything could disappear again, but something inside me whispered that healing doesn't mean never being afraid. Healing means showing up even when you are afraid. So I agreed. And when I stood there on stage telling my story, I didn't feel like the girl who lost everything anymore. I felt like the woman who built herself back up, even when the world expected her not to. After the speech, a young woman came up to me with tears in her eyes and said she was being pushed out of her job after a major illness, and she didn't know whether to fight or give up. And she hugged me so tight and said that hearing me gave her the courage to defend herself. And in that moment, I finally understood that everything I endured wasn't pointless. Because if my story helps even one person feel less alone, then maybe that was the reason it happened to me instead of someone else. With time, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living again. I signed up for classes. I started traveling with Rachel. Sometimes we just sat in cafes, laughing about silly things like we used to before everything fell apart. And eventually I found a new job too. One that valued me, that didn't treat workers like machines, that cared about the person. Not just the title, and not once have they made me feel guilty for being human. And that mattered more than money or status or revenge ever could. One evening, months later, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights twinkle under the night sky. And for the first time, I whispered, I'm grateful not for the pain, not for the coma. Never that, but for who I became afterward, because I'm stronger now, more confident, more compassionate, and maybe I wouldn't be here in this moment without everything that went wrong before. So I closed my eyes, breathed in the cold night air, and let myself finally believe that I didn't just get my life back, I got a better one. Do you believe painful experiences can shape people into better versions of themselves? Or do you think some wounds never truly heal?